I think it's a really interesting question whenever you're talking about the government and culture and Indigenous people. For me, I think in terms of raising awareness, I think that we need to actually go back to what it means for Indigenous people to be sovereign. And I think if as a country we can acknowledge Indigenous sovereignty and understand what treaty rights really mean, then we're going to be able to move forward with an entirely different type of awareness and allyship. I think the biggest problem that we have in Canada is that people inherently don't understand the complex history of Indigenous people and therefore have all of these misconceptions which cause us to see each other differently. And if we had clearer answers to a lot of the questions that we have about each other, I think we'd be able to move forward in a much different way. So I think it's less about culture and more about information. Canada's done a really good job embedding Indigenous culture into everything, and it's not necessarily doing any good for the situation between Indigenous people and our allies. I think it needs to be more about facts and information and history, and that is a beautiful thing. I think we need to stop covering up these things with culture and things like Canada 150, because it doesn't help us move forward. It doesn't add to our ability to interact and to come together. People are always going to make excuses to not be active, and they're always going to use their own personal placement as their climate. And I think as Indigenous people, we're sovereign. And in Canada, there's been a really big misconception that we're better off, and it's untrue. And so I think that what we need to do is stop making barriers and stop defining our climate as American or Canadian or this or that, and actually start seeing our situation as people. It's not that different, and the things that we're up against are quite similar. And so I think the idea of inaction is just solely based on people not wanting to stand up and not wanting to acknowledge the political system that they're in. So for me, I don't see any difference between Canada and the US. I'm not any more threatened by Trump than I feel threatened by Trudeau. I think they're the same entity, and I think that people need to rise up against injustice in the same way. Whether it's a kinder face with better hair, great. It's the same evil, and it's the same kind of uprising that we need to see. People make a lot of assumptions about what they can and can't do, and all of it fundamentally comes down to whether or not you want to resist. And I think we have to resist regardless of any of the opposition or what the walls look like. Indigenous people got Justin Trudeau in office. He inspired them to vote. We saw record numbers. People were running out of ballots. And I think that Show Like 40 was such a huge wake-up call for me, because there's this guy who's supposed to be there to help Indigenous people navigate through the political system. Like, that's his job. It took a year for people to realize that Justin Trudeau is not a celebrity. He's our prime minister, and he needs to be accountable. And I think that politicians are regular people, and the worst damage we've seen is from people who stand up and refuse to talk to the people. So I think we're in a better place, because at least Justin Trudeau wants to talk, but people need to use that.